So here's another guest post. Cato's speech is this channel that I really like him for some reason because his delivery is so calm and peaceful and measured, and yet what he has to say is pretty incendiary. So that juxtaposition between the two, his delivery that's almost like ASMR, right, on the one hand, and what he's actually saying, which is just fucking hardcore a lot of times. I love him. I think he's a great channel. I think he's a great guy, and I think that you're going to enjoy this video very much. And if you enjoy this video, go to his channel and subscribe to him because I think you'll enjoy it as much as I do. Okay? Okay. So without further ado, Cato's speech.
Hello there. I'm Cato, and Coach asked me to provide some content during his vacation. I'm honored and happy to help out, but I assume that only time will tell if it was a smart move of him to host Austrian extremists like me. Anyway, here we go. There is this hope out there, when it comes to the topic of Western countries and Islam, that Muslims can somehow be secularized and domesticated to make them more fitting for our modern-day Western society. This hopeful attitude can be found quite often amongst the more right-leaning civic nationalist types, who have already realized that this multicultural experiment is not really working out that well, and that the enrichment that it brings with it tends to be overwhelmingly negative, especially when it comes to Muslims. But instead of facing up to reality, they prefer to hope that if not the entire Islamic world, then at least the ever-increasing number of Muslims in the West could get the same treatment that the West has received for such a long time now. What these very naive people never seem to ask is, of course, why should Muslims ever want to do that to themselves? Because everybody able to look realistically at things as they are can clearly see that there is no gain, no useful effect for Muslims in such a development whatsoever. Quite the opposite, actually. Let's get to the core of this issue. In all honesty, why would they want to become quote-unquote westernized? Why would they want to abandon their religious and cultural ties only to become part of a weakened and individualized society? Why should they dismiss their own strengths as a group with shared interests in an environment where other groups have allowed themselves to be deconstructed and weakened to the point of utter helplessness? Obviously, this would only be a huge disadvantage, and there is no need for them to fully integrate into such a society and to adopt a culture that produces seemingly not much more than vulnerability. There is simply no gain that is worth the effort, no need for them to comply with the rules. Why would they want to conform to current Western standards and integrate into something that is on so many levels alien to them? After all, they already get the handouts and aggressive advocacy in their favor by an entire industry of pro-immigration groups that have a huge interest in maintaining or even increasing the problems created by mass immigration instead of solving them. This new migration industry and the forces that collaborate with it also just behave according to supply and demand. So, more problematic foreigners in need of assistance simply equates to more financial support and an increased demand of their services. Besides all of that, it seems to be hard for many people to understand the immense disdain that your average Muslim has towards Westerners. They view them as weak degenerates, and frankly, to a huge extent they are sadly correct with that assessment. Family values, public conduct, sexuality, religious belief, and so many other things have deteriorated in the West, to the point where society seems to be on the constant verge of collapse and complete moral bankruptcy. Not to say that Muslims living in the West don't become a part of these negative aspects as well. But just like in the case of abandoning their religious and cultural ties in favor of the pleasures that the West has to offer, it is also a relatively small number that actually adopts any real loyalty towards the political and social structures of the West. And it comes again back to the simple question. Why would they want to become a part of something like that? Something like modern-day Western society. Something that they generally despise and look down upon. Why should there be any sort of respect or even friendly sentiments when Western nations and their peoples are, regardless of huge numbers of negative circumstances, willing to open their borders, wallets and legs for them? When Muslims and other peoples from the third world look at the West in its current state, they don't see an inspiring example for how to model or reshape their own societies. But what they do see is an impressively wealthy society, which is weak and stupid enough to hand over money, resources and living space to them. And all they have to do is to appeal to a publicly reinforced insane notion of guilt and humanitarian needs. In other words, to them it looks like
it's free real estate.
And there lies the fundamental problem. Simply said, why should they even bother with serious integration? And as if all of that was not enough on its own, there are also the political parties interested in the creation and expansion of new groups of reliable voters. A strategy focused on creating a voting base that is existentially bound to the party, its electoral success, and the policies that it is able to implement. In Europe it is especially the Social Democrats and the Green parties who have made it their utmost interest in the last decades to appeal to Muslims as a new source of voters. They do this despite the various negative impacts on the native population, amongst it especially the working class, and the fact that the core beliefs, lifestyles and behavior patterns of most Muslims are fundamentally opposed to the left-leaning ideologies of those parties. Now, for Muslims, this is not a big issue. They recognize useful idiots when they see them. At the moment, those parties are very useful vehicles to get them precisely what they want. Muslims can use them without much trouble as a tool to, metaphorically speaking, cross the river. And as soon as the need for floating fools decreases, they will simply get rid of those parties and other short-sighted helpers, and establish their own independent means of social and political representation, whenever it is possible or necessary to do so. No matter if it is established political parties catering to them, or self-reliant advocacy in their own interest. There is yet again no need for a sincere commitment to full integration. To sum it up, a sufficient integration of a large enough number of Muslims in Western countries, which will turn them into secularized loyal citizens, is very unlikely. And now, with massive third world immigration, you also get racial, ethnic and religious divides as an unwelcome addition. In the end, it creates a fifth column of disloyal and hostile foreigners, who for obvious reasons have neither the intention nor the need of becoming an actual part of the countries that they live in. Their self-interest as a group remains paramount, and this does not even take into account the immense differences of IQ distribution between European, Middle Eastern and African populations, and the huge problems of maintaining a functional society with such extremely different groups living side by side on a daily basis without constant conflict. What might be a promising opportunity for certain divide and rule types and others who want to use immigrants as a tool to change economic circumstances in their favor is and will continue to be devastating for the native populations. Whilst for Muslims it is still very promising to come to the West. Why? Well, for once there is free stuff, a lot of it. And of course the prospect of conquest. If that happens through demographic means or the use of force, is in the long run irrelevant. On the other hand, the only prospects for Western countries, if they continue the mass importation of Muslims and buying into the delusion that they can all be successfully integrated, is, in the best case, turning one's homogeneous or at least very similar populations into a divided multicultural mess of constantly struggling racial, ethnic and religious interest groups. And in the worst case, full-blown civil war, alongside with the horrors of ethnic cleansing. Only the future can tell what the outcome will be, but it will only become more unpleasant the longer people continue to make awful decisions out of good intentions. There will not be a domesticated Islam that lives up to the delusional fantasies of civic nationalists and liberals alike. Things are already complicated enough, without a continued dedication to obvious failures on a societal scale.